and I'll stop talking about that. All right. Hello. How's everyone? Hopefully everything's going okay for you. If you logged in already, you've already heard my whining about how I don't feel good, and it's true. So I'll try really hard not to whine too much to you, but it's going to happen. I'm just saying. I'm trying to, sorry, I'm opening the weekly question, but the view is on several different pages and you can't read it. It's really small. So hang on one sec. And then let me find the notes. All right, but hopefully everything's going well for you. If you guys have any questions about anything, of course, let me know. If you sent me an email recently, it is possible, like yesterday, I felt not good, which is still the same. But I figured today I have to come to work because, yeah, so here I am. But if I didn't answer your email, there was a reason I started saying that. If I didn't answer your email, I'm in the process of doing that between classes today. So hopefully I will get caught up on the emails. Okay, that's my goal. All right, I think I have everything open now. Somebody's calling me. Okay. Why does no one ever call you until you are on the phone? Oh, a couple of you mentioned the STAR. So hopefully the STAR test went well for you. And, you know, your goal in the STAR test is to only take it once. So you'll be fine. So I don't think anyone ever knows or cares what your STAR test score was. You just need to pass. Yeah. Because I know your school wants you to get, it used to be commended, but I think now it's called advanced measures because it makes the school look better. But yeah, no one cares what it does, you know, for you. It doesn't matter. But help your school out. That's nice. All right. Share the screen. Standardized testing. It's amazing for testing companies. They make so much money. I'm happy for them, sort of. Yeah. Yeah, no, your STAR test shouldn't be too hard. Hopefully. Yeah. It's supposed to be kind of a measure of if they've done well, if you've absorbed what they hoped you absorbed, and then some odd questions in addition. So, all right, weekly questions. Crud, I know we went over due dates last time, but I have the 3 different classes, so probably don't remember. I think your chapter 27 question was due last week, maybe book review this week, and then Obama and Trump question next week. So the one we're probably talking the most about this week is compare Obama and Trump's presidential campaigns, really limit it to the campaign, because comparing the presidencies would take like 5 pages. Oh, excuse me, and describe their similarities and differences. I'm checking the chat, sorry. Okay. All right. Yeah, we always need to go over stuff, don't we? Okay. But we'll do that kind of as we go through the notes. And if you have some concerns about the Bush question, and I completely know if you turned stuff down in last week or weekend, I haven't graded it. I've got a deadline for my other job and I feel like crap. So I'm sorry. So I'm super slow, but my goal is to be caught up by next Monday or Tuesday on everything. So all right, so as we look through the notes today, we will think about Obama and Trump's presidential campaigns. All right, let's look at the notes. All right. Ugh. Here we go, maybe. All right. So I think this is probably about where we were last time. It feels familiar because we had just started to talk. Oh yeah, I made the sad story about my student who thought I was really dumb. Oh well, it's what high school students are for, right? So the historic nature of Obama's campaign. So who he was is historic. We wouldn't want to overlook that. He's the first African-American president, for certain. He's youngish, that's kind of unique as well, but the unique-ish part is the use of social media, in addition to clearly being the first African-American president. Anytime we say the first, that's clearly unique. the use of social media and electronic media to raise money, reach new voters. He used, I'm really sure it was Facebook, pretty successfully. And candidates, of course, still use social media. You guys know if you're 18 or older, you probably get texts about who you should vote for from different campaigns. When you turn on your computer, if you log onto the internet, you get ads for people running for office. So, oh, sorry for the giant yawn. People certainly use social media now in pretty broad ways to recruit voters, campaign volunteers, to do all sorts of stuff, raise money, um, advertise, all of the things that candidates need to do. All right, and I don't know. I'm sure that the marketing official or professionals understand which sites are more effective, less effective, and of course, that certain age groups use different types of social media. Honestly, no, yeah, I'm going to be officially sorry you were at the orthodontist as well. Had a dental appointment last week. Those are uncool, but anyway, um, different age groups use different social media. During that era, everybody's just kind of starting to use social media, and I think there's sort of a switch from what was the MySpace. You guys are probably not old enough to know anything about that, and I certainly did not have MySpace, to Facebook. And now, of course, there's 8 million different things. I have no idea, again, what people your age, whatever your age is, use, but I know Facebook is kind of an older person thing. Because I have Facebook and I'm older than you. And I got Facebook because my nieces and nephews were on there and I never heard from them. See, old people problems. So I went on there to kind of see what they were doing. And then I pretty instantly regretted it in some instances. It's like, yeah. Yeah. And I think Facebook globally, yeah, I'm sure you're right. It's pretty trendy stuff. But my dad is on Facebook and he's 80s, so I know old people are on there. Watch out for the old people. And I know my younger acquaintances ask me if I'm on Snap. So I think they like Snapchat. And then my guess is your generation, you guys younger than 20, probably do something completely different. I don't know what it is. But I'm not going there because I'm old. But candidates are wise to go to the different mediums because they're going to have different sorts of campaigns to target different sorts of voters, for sure. And President Obama is the first president to really take into account social media in his campaigning. So, yeah. Oh, that is interesting. That, yeah. And I think too, if you have friends and relatives, somebody said their parents use social media a lot more than they do. I know my dad is, crud, that man's on Facebook all the time. And and I know he has a little job, but he does not work as much as I do. He's always sending me weird stories and political stuff like that. To know. But I think too, if you have friends in different countries or relatives in different countries, which I have a few of those, it's also easier and in some ways cheaper to communicate that way. It may or may not be as private. And I think Snapchat or whatever we were talking about, Facebook is cousins with WhatsApp, which I think is pretty trendy as well for international communication. But again, I don't know. What do I know? All right. But I do know that the use of computer technology, the internet, that sort of stuff, really separated President Obama from the people he ran against. And he ran against, didn't he run against, crap, that was a long time ago, Bob Dole, who was really old. Although nowadays we only want old candidates and old political leaders, apparently. So not that I get irritated by that. But I like old people, but goodness, I don't know if I want someone my dad's age as president. No offense to President Biden or President Trump. Glad they've made it this far. All right. For President Obama, It's going to restore and renew relations. This, of course, gets into his presidency with Cuba, North Korea. The economy is going to improve. It's an odd economic correction or improvement because the economy improves, but we don't really add jobs. So they sometimes refer to it as a jobless recovery. And because the economic numbers are odd, it was sort of hard to know if President Obama would get reelected. 2012. I really lost track of when the elections were, haven't I? Because the economy was still a little soft and unemployment numbers were kind of high for it to be considered a full recovery. But I think in the modern era, because so many jobs have changed and the jobs that we tend to add in the modern era are either technology related or service related. Some of those jobs are really good. Sometimes you lose a job that was really good and you can't replace it with a good job. So sometimes you just don't go back to your job and instead you do contract work and you might still technically show up as unemployed in some of the numbers. So all that stuff becomes more complicated as work becomes different. And I think they refer to this as the gig economy, where you get a contract job and you work that and then it goes away. And so then you look for another contract job. And that's kind of what I do, I suppose. Because, if I have a class, then I have a job. And if people don't sign up for my class, I don't have a job. So yeah, And universities do this much more with their professors as well. They hire adjuncts, which is what I am, who, you teach a class if there is a class, rather than tenured faculty who are guaranteed a certain salary. But most businesses are moving this way because one, they can, and two, it's cheaper for them. So I think that is not uncommon. And it provides, we'll go with freedom for the employee, but it also provides less economic stability. And if you're younger, you don't care as much. Sometimes it's like, ooh, this will give me a chance to try out a bunch of different things, which of course is a great thing when you're younger. When you're old, I don't know if you like that as much, but it's the way of the world, I suppose. All right. But anyway, the economy changes during this time period, and the statistics, the way we measure the statistics, this is what I was trying to say, in case you missed it, the way we measure those statistics hasn't really changed. So the way people work and the way we measure work, whether you're employed or unemployed, probably aren't as consistent as they need to be to accurately reflect things. No. But anyway. All right. So I think people who traditionally follow political science were sort of unsure whether President Obama would be reelected, because typically if the economy is not quite right, you don't get a second term. It was not quite right, but President Obama got a second term. And I think part of it was his personality. And I'm trying to think who he ran. Oh, Mitt Romney. He ran against Mitt Romney. Dang, I don't know if you remember that. Probably not 2012 campaign. Mitt Romney, do you know who he is? Have you heard of Mitt Romney? Mitt Romney is like this is a weird thing. Mitt Romney's like a Boy Scout kind of dude. Like he's like super Mormon. So he follows all the tenets of his faith, and he doesn't say bad words, and he's got a bunch of kids, and he went on a mission, and he probably doesn't drink caffeine. Like he's super, I don't know, ethical, moral kind of thing, Yeah, no, I understood. Yeah, you guys probably were super young on the politics side, but he's a decent fellow. Like if you needed somebody to babysit your kids, nothing would ever go wrong, that kind of thing. He just does nice things. Now he's a venture capitalist as well, which some people's like, that's not so cool. But I mean, and it helped him become pretty wealthy as well. But he's kind of a straight-laced guy. I don't know if I'm using terminology that younger folks use, but he doesn't swear, he doesn't drink, he doesn't do drugs. He's just like, I don't know, he's not doing anything he shouldn't do in that part of his life. And he really was portrayed as some horrible, like pet abusing, um, sexist, horrible kind of dude in the campaign. And I thought, that was, I told my students, I said, this is pretty clever to find a guy who really has no personal faults that you could talk about, but still effectively portray him in a way that doesn't reflect who he was personally. Now, you could have easily disagreed with what he did for a living or his political stances. He's a fairly socially conservative, fiscally conservative Republican, but not like extremely right. He's kind of a moderate Republican. He's one of the Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump, and it's a really small group of folks. So, and certainly a little out of favor with some Republicans now, but he's not like ultra conservative. But it was interesting how he was portrayed in the campaign. But Obama wins, and I think just because, well, people liked Obama and the economy was basically pretty good. So, I mean, it was a little weird, but it was pretty good. And as far as foreign affairs, nothing really dramatically bad was, we were okay. So we were happy. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about cultural and economic changes that happened during the time period, and then we'll go back to Trump and talk about his election. Trump. Trump's election, I'm still distressed about it. Not that he won, because we're not talking about, politics or anything, but he ruined my credibility as a history teacher or professor, because students ask me, like, who do you think will win the Republican nomination? And I said, all I know is it won't be Trump. What the heck? Oh my gosh. I really messed that one up, didn't I? Because typically we don't pick somebody with zero political experience to be the presidential nominee. But there you go. And he was successful. By successful, I mean got elected. Because some of you are like, no, I hated him. No, he got elected. I know. But anyway, okay, it was interesting. And really, I think really notes a shift. Maybe, I don't know if it's a long-term shift or it was a special cause kind of shift, but a shift in how we elect and why we elect who we elect. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Sorry, I got excited about that. Let's talk about other stuff. All right, changes that happened in the Clinton Bush Obama era. So, Clinton Bush Obama. I don't know if that could be one guy or not. Could be that show where they sing in costumes. That could be like a Clinton Bush Obama character. Pay gap between men and women decreases slightly, but continues. People will argue about why this is, and I listen to arguments about this. I rarely make arguments about this. In the profession that I work in, especially, like, my main profession was teaching high school, but I've taught ACC. I think next year will be year 20, so it's not been a recent job for me, but my high school teaching was a little longer. They just pay us by how many years experience we have. So there's definitely not a gap. Like, the dude who taught next door to me didn't make more money because he was the guy. But he probably made more money because he was the baseball coach. They taught social studies. So they got stipends for sports. And I think what you see with pay gap, that sort of stuff, is you see professions that women typically go into are paid lower than those that men typically go into. And you can also see discussions like, well, women should go into professions where they'll make more. If they want to make more money, they've got to be a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. Although probably not lawyer in the modern era, no offense to lawyers, but we tend to be a little overpopulated with lawyers right now. So it's harder to find a job. I'm not saying you won't find a job, you will. That's where you're headed. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, that's, people seem to be going into that. But, men aren't teachers because teachers don't make squat. We make squat. We just don't make much more than squat. And men aren't nurses because I don't know why men aren't nurses as a rule. I have theories, but and also women are more likely to leave the workforce temporarily when children are born. Usually if there's somebody that needs to stay home with a kid or pick up the kid because he's sick, or do all the, take the kid to the doctor, take the kid to this appointment, take the kid to those lessons, that's typically the woman. So because the woman leaves the job more for family, that sort of thing. And I know all these are stereotypes, but they're borne out by statistics. So, I'm not trying to be sexist or anything. They are borne out by statistics. People can argue that the pay gap really is because women make choices about family and career direction. It's not about unequal pay in certain industries. And we would have to do a whole lot more research to decide that. And of course, that's not our task here, but you do see the pay gap decrease. I do remember one of these school districts I worked at, it was Austin, I'll just say. When I worked in Austin ISD 100 years ago, it was 90, I worked there in 1990 and then again in 92, I think it was. If you didn't use your sick days, they would give you a bonus, like $500. But when they looked at all the data, they noticed that only the male teachers were getting the bonuses because the female teachers always stayed home with their kids. So they stopped doing that because they realized that maybe that was an unfair way to give a bonus, that sort of thing. But I don't know, stuff like that, I think you'll notice in certain industries that the intent is not to be discriminatory, certainly, but the end result sometimes is. Anyway, we'll get off that. Yeah. Okay. Manufacturing jobs continue to shift outside the US. Have you noticed, do you watch the news about this kind of stuff? There's starting to be a push to have some manufacturing jobs return, primarily like computer chip manufacturing, because not all of that, but much of it is done in Taiwan. And Taiwan is a little too close to China and a little, China's not a big fan of Taiwan, you probably heard. And so there are threats from China to Taiwan to maybe either absorb or cut off their computer chip industry. And there are shortages in the automotive industry right now. So there's a whole lot of talk about how it's time to bring back some manufacturing. And we also noticed with PPE, personal protective equipment, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were really at the mercy of the countries who produced all of that stuff. So we outsourced a lot of that stuff because frankly, it's cheaper to buy it from foreign countries because they pay their employees less. And there are other reasons as well, but we'll go with that. But it does leave you vulnerable. And in an international economy, you're always more vulnerable than it seems you are. And I think we have noticed that in the last couple of years. So it may be that we'll see some manufacturing return to the United States. I have no idea. But I think there's a push for it, and I think we've seen why it's probably a good idea, and why we probably, maybe, it's not an American thing, but maybe we should be willing to pay just a little bit more for some products to ensure that we can always have them in the event of a crisis. However, I'm definitely not in charge of industrial production. I'm just in charge of a US history class. Oh, sorry. Ouch. All right. Healthcare and service jobs are very prominent in the United States. And of course, anything to do with technology. Yeah. So technology and service jobs are they fit together. And if you've ever worked in like restaurant industry, those sorts of service jobs are really experiencing some difficulty right now because people, even though the restaurants are reopening at full capacity, it's hard to find employees for those jobs at this point. So you may see a change in how some of those jobs work, maybe either an increased salary or I saw some weird stories about how they're training robots to do some of the basic wait staff stuff, which is interesting and a little odd. But my guess is that's not going to be a big thing. But what do I know? I was wrong about my presidential pick in 2012, so 2016, sorry. All right, healthcare and service jobs become more prominent in the US. And we have a population too that's skewing pretty old. So healthcare for old folks, that's going to be a really big industry, I think. And there are a couple of generations, like if you look at statistics, there are a couple of generations that are large. The one retiring right now is pretty large. My generation, not so much, which is bad because we got to pay for, we're the highest earning generation and we got to pay for all those dang old folks. We love them, but yeah, they're expensive. But then the generation behind us is pretty big. So hopefully they'll make up for that when we start retiring. And then your parents didn't have enough kids, so you guys are in a spot. So, and birth rates are decreasing, so it's a problem. It's an economic problem. I mean, yeah. So anyway, all right, we'll keep going. Segregation resurfaces. And this really is the heart of modern segregation. And you know this instinctively, whether you've studied this or not. Segregation now, especially where we live, socioeconomic, 100%. Um, I would always tell my students, especially when I taught in a more affluent school, which I did toward the end of my career, I said, hey, you guys really segregate out here. And they go like, no, we're not like that at all. We're not racist. I said, I didn't say you were racist. I said, you segregated. I said, like, you don't want me living out here. And they said, well, sure, we don't mind if you live out here. Why do you say that? And I said, because I drove past your neighborhood and it said houses begin at $500,000. That's how you do it. So when the neighborhood is really expensive, no, only certain sorts of people can afford to live there, and then that effectively segregates housing patterns and schools and everything else in the neighborhoods. It's why the Supreme Court ruled a few years back that something called Section 8 housing, I don't know if you're very familiar with that. I am because of, childhood and stuff. Section 8 housing is government where the government pays for part of your rent. So and typically they had Section 8 housing it wasn't like you could live anywhere and the government would assist you, but there were certain housing complexes, duplexes, or apartments typically where all the poor folks lived and everybody knew like that's where the poor people live and the government pays part of their rent. But they were always in poor neighborhoods. So the Supreme Court ruled that has to change, that they have to provide Section 8 housing pretty much throughout a town so that kids will have an opportunity to go to more affluent school districts, which sometimes provide better opportunities. So I'm sure the folks in Westlake or in my school district near Vandegrift are very excited about that Supreme Court ruling. But it is kind of interesting because segregation in the modern era in so many ways really it's socioeconomic. It's not just about your race or ethnicity, it's about how much money you make. So, but certainly that affects housing patterns and economic issues. It's also why when cities go through what they call gentrification, certain parts of certain cities become a little more trendy. Even families who owned their houses and have owned their houses for generations get priced out because the property taxes on those houses go up as the values go up. So it's tricky. And it's why you see people moving out of East Austin whose families may have lived there for generations. So, and where I live in Leander, you're about to see our own version of that as we've become like one of the fastest growing cities, kind of a city in the United States, and all we build is really expensive houses. So like if you want an apartment in Leander, you're going to pay, over $1,000, probably $1,500 a month. And 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. So it's weird stuff. And there's all sorts of effects because people look at the improving economy in certain areas and go, well, that's really good, but it tends to price poorer people out. And then they get more and more isolated into certain neighborhoods and school districts, which, may or may not be as good. So it's tricky stuff, I think. Political divisions remain shocking, I know. And you've already noticed this if you paid any attention in the last couple of years. To win the primary, so the election where your party determines who the nominee for your party is going to be, you probably have to be for Republicans more conservative, for Democrats more liberal than the mainstream of your party. for whatever reason, more extremes win the party. But then to get the general election voters, you have to kind of move a little more to the middle. It's not always true, but it's typically true. Oh, sorry. All right. Important political movements, some of which are still kind of around. And this is when, I think this is when the book was written, so it's a year or two old, so I haven't added newer stuff to it, but of course, you know, you can add, of course, your weekly question really is about the election cycles, but we'll talk about that in a second. Occupy Wall Street, which I don't know, you guys are young. You see these guys, and I think Antifa sort of comes out of this movement a little bit, but Occupy Wall Street was a younger person, kind of college age group movement of people who are upset primarily about, I don't know that capitalism is probably an overstatement, but the inequities between the people at the top end of the economic spectrum and the bottom, and about how the government isn't working to bring those two groups closer together financially. Not like let's all hug and be friends, but they're not taking care of people at the bottom end, and the government tends to be geared toward taking care of people at the top end. So these guys could do, you know, just your normal, let's walk around with signs kind of protest, but they also really like to deface, at the very least, and sometimes vandalize. They did this at Wall Street because it's a symbol, of course, of the stock market and the larger corporations. But this happened a lot in Seattle and Portland, and at the headquarters of some of like Nike, and they hit Starbucks really hard, which I always thought was funny. I don't know, I'm an old person, so we're weird, but I always thought it was really funny because they were probably some of the same people that when Starbucks started really went to Starbucks, and they liked the product. They didn't like the corporate culture, although Starbucks tends to be a fairly friendly place to work. It's usually ranked highly, but Starbucks is a very large corporation. So, but they would, they mostly deface like statues and building fronts and that sort of stuff, and sometimes would break things as well. And then as they grew, and I think some of the people who started that kind of morphed into Antifa, but you might see them become more aggressive as time goes along. The Black Lives Matter protest or movement begins in 2014 as a reaction to several public use of excessive force incidents by police, both police officers or departments. Some people will allege there's certain departments against African Americans. And of course, you've seen this in the modern era, especially the last year or two with, most recently with the George Floyd and the Chauvin trial, but there's certainly more instances each year. And probably each year you can find 8 or 10 pretty egregious incidents that are talked about quite a bit in the news. And the point of this movement really was to shine a greater spotlight on those incidents, and they've been clearly successful at that. Now, it's not the only point of the movement. The point is to change policies and tactics and things so that there aren't 8 or 10 of these incidents every year. And people might, you can argue one way or another whether that part of it has been as successful. Now, I think you will see in this coming year some police reform legislation that will go through Congress. And I'm sure, one of the things you have seen for sure that we can easily quantify is that most police departments now have the cameras that the officers' body cams that they're required to use. And I'm not sure that would have happened without this movement. So you're going to be able to see, some changes, but probably definitely not the ultimate change that they wanted. And I also know, because I know, anytime I teach a class, there's probably liberal, there's probably conservative folks. There are people who would argue that there are some people at the top of this organization that maybe have profited from it. That's probably going to be true in any organization, but the movement itself, I think probably everyone understands. And I, I will just go on from there, but certainly is still an issue, clearly still an issue of concern. Tea Party movement in 2010 was a pushback against perceived federal government outreach. So this is what leads to, it really leads to the nomination and success of Donald Trump. Certainly not the original intent of this, but it's modeled after what they saw with the original Tea Party, a protest against taxes and government overreach back in, the colonial days, where it was unfair to tax the tea, and taxation without representation, that sort of thing. So this is, you see this more in the Midwest and the South, and it's people who really think that local and state control is being overrun and federal governments are too large, that sort of, excuse me, that sort of thing. And then the Me Too movement is a more public pushback against sexist and sexually abusive behavior against women. And you see it, you see a lot of it in the beginning of the movement against entertainment industry issues, or because of entertainment industry issues. But of course, you saw it in the a bit of it, fairly or unfairly, in the Supreme Court nomination of Neil Gorsuch. And you do tend to see, this continue to be discussed as well. So, so you see movements really against corporate culture and corporate excess, against police excessive force, which, while you still see several egregious incidents per year, probably 8 to 10 that make the news. Tea Party movement, maybe definitely a pushback against federal government overreach, and then women saying enough's enough and pushing back against consistent sexually abusive behavior, sexism within the workforce. And all of these things have led to changes, I believe, in workplaces and society, that sort of thing. They may not have achieved ultimate goals. That's tricky. Yeah. All right. Now for the second half of the weekly question. I know the things some of you are going like, I don't care about the other stuff. Weekly question. Weekly question. Here we go. Donald J. Trump. Donald J. Trump. This still puzzles me that we elected Donald Trump, not because I like or dislike him, but it's what it says here. He's a non-traditional anti-establishment candidate. It's like, we don't normally elect those guys. We don't normally pick the guy who was a real estate mogul and ran casinos and hosted a fairly successful reality TV show. It's like, that's not normally who we pick. But if you look at international trends, you started to see a little more of this internationally as well. So I should have looked more at international trends. Well, I don't know that you picked him. I'm not suggesting that you did, but certainly in his election, he got a lot of popular votes. Now, there's no doubt in the 2020 election, Biden got more popular votes. So would not argue anything other than that. And I know that there's some discussion still about, some suppression and difficulties with the voting process, but Trump, president, there he is. So he wins the Republican nomination against a whole boatload of people. I think there were like 25. And the campaigning techniques are unusual. If you watched any of the debates, and I know it was a long time ago, so you guys were young, but I would watch the debates and I would go, that's the kind of stuff, because I taught high school then, that's the kind of stuff that we would send people to the office for, recognizing we don't send adults to the office when they talk to each other in fairly extreme or harsh kinds of ways. But it was just odd. And I think people, I don't know. I don't know. But there it was. I mean, it wasn't what we were used to as traditional, polished. I don't even know the word I'm looking for. Diplomatic. That's the word I'm looking for. He's not a diplomatic type of person. And we typically would pick, it's not always, because I mean, we had Andrew Jackson, and Nixon, when he got elected, was the new Nixon, and I completely realize that behind the scenes, none of these folks are the same. I completely get that. We have all sorts of tapes and writing that suggest that about almost every president. So I do get that. But that, I think, is also part of the reason people liked Trump. I know not everybody, and it was a pretty close 50-50 split. But I think the people who liked him because he was the same person in private that he was in public. And I think that's probably mostly true, for better or worse. I think that part about Trump is probably true. So, the people who wanted to break the system, stir things up, they called it drain the swamp. The Tea Party guys who thought, we need somebody at the top that understands the people at the bottom. And Trump certainly had the rhetoric of a colloquial kind of person. That probably, I don't know that came out quite the best way, but we'll go back to he said what was on his mind, and we all know this because of Twitter and press conferences and speeches. I mean, we know that when Trump thought something, Trump said it. And I think people appreciated the honesty. I don't know, but it was a huge change from the diplomacy that we typically expected of presidents, of people at the top of our political spectrum. I also recognize there are people in Congress who have, traditionally said what they thought and continually get reelected as well. So Trump, just different. Okay, so not feeling constrained by diplomatic language. That's a little different for Trump, but also skillful use of social media, but also network media. I mean, here you have a candidate who spends less than half of the people who ran against him and still had great success. I mean, to the point where he got elected in 2016. But it's because he became sort of the news. So he constantly got news coverage, and he didn't have to pay for campaign ads because he was always on the news. And he spoke a lot, and he always got covered. And when he didn't get covered, he was using social media. So then people covered the social media. And I think that has led to a change in how people campaign. I'm certain it has. So it's just different, but it's become a little more the norm. I think the election of Biden, it's too early to really analyze all of this stuff, but I think the election of Biden's a little bit of a pushback against that. But certainly some of the people, like the group they call the Squad, the younger candidates, they really they use social media as well and tend to use it pretty skillfully. All right, back to Trump. So we have a non-traditional anti-establishment candidate who skillfully used social media, especially Twitter. Yeah, he really brought Twitter into the mainstream politically in a lot of ways, or at least coverage of Twitter. I know that his use of Twitter is at best non-traditional. I really do know that, but oh my goodness. And his campaign and enthusiasts use Facebook quite a bit. And that's also part of the reason in that the campaign last year that they objected so much when he got taken off of Twitter, because they had used it and he had used it so successfully. So they felt like that limited his ability to campaign. And it certainly changed the methods that he had to use. And then, of course, there's all the First Amendment free speech arguments, how do they apply on the use of private sites like Facebook and Twitter and Google and all that stuff. All right. So campaign slogans, Make America Great Again, which is kind of a rehash of the Reagan slogan. And I'm sure that wasn't an accident. I know we talked about that in class when he ran. It's like, he appears non-traditional, but he's going to use some traditional slogans. And then, a lot of chanting at the rallies. You may or may not remember, but and I think this is what was this to me. This is what really was kind of non-diplomatic and non-traditional. We'll go with that. I mean, it really was. The chanting about build the wall or build that wall and lock her up, that was directed at Hillary Clinton because of use of a email server and maybe some other stuff. And then just the slogan of drain the swamp. But when he led a campaign rally, there was chanting and it was, he would say things. If a heckler started to heckle him, he'd heckle them back. And, he had a very different, we'll go with non-diplomatic personality. Now, when you're doing the question where you compare and contrast the campaigns of Obama and Trump, they use some of these same, they use social media both really well. And there, sometimes you could see Obama have a little pushback when he got a question he didn't like, that sort of thing. But it wasn't I'm going to call you names, I'm going to lead a rally of chants against you. It wasn't the same method. So they may have used the same, I don't even know what the right word is now, the same vehicles to campaign, the same internet, the same social media platforms. That's the same platforms. But they certainly did not use them in the same way. Goodness, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words. It doesn't always happen, does it? But Trump really led me to a loss for words, not because I liked or disliked him, but because it's like he just doesn't fit. I mean, he just doesn't fit in a lot of ways, but he was president. So there you go. And the Trump presidency is part of a global move to insert more aggressive nationalistic leaders throughout the world. And that is true. I mean, you'll see that. I think you see it in a pretty big way. I think you see it a little bit in France. You saw it some in England. You see it in a really big way in Brazil. I have a bunch of buddies in Brazil with Bolsonaro. They call him the tropical Trump. So he's a different kind of guy. But we certainly were not the only country that had that movement during this time period. Trump's going to withdraw the US from the Paris Climate Accords, ban some immigration from many, not all, but many Islamic countries, and reverse processes on DACA. And let me scroll down just a sec. Oh, that's it. Okay. Oh my goodness. All right. So we'll definitely talk more about the Trump presidency. I know I don't have a whole lot of notes there. And we'll maybe next week in class, we'll look over maybe more of the review stuff for the quiz, but we'll also look over the weekly question a bit more, because I know it's not due till next week. But yeah, when you talk about the Trump candidacy versus the Obama candidacy, certainly mention the use of social media, but you can also mention Trump was especially really skillful at getting free coverage. I think there are probably a couple of things that Trump should be remembered for and for being innovative. And one is, whether you like it or not, how he campaigned and how he was able to get more coverage for less money. Because typically whoever spends the most wins. And that was not always the case with Trump. And I do think use of the government to produce the vaccine quickly, I think that at some point when we're, out of the feeling of the time period, we'll look back and go, well, was probably something that was really well done by the Trump administration. You probably are not going to, people are probably not ready to look at that and go like, no, that's correct. But, and not, well, I won't say any more about that. And certainly the Biden administration has taken that and run with it as he should. I mean, that's, and I know I was talking to a friend who puts up with me talking about history more than I should in my private life. And I said, you know, I think one of the things that I really miss about politics in really the 80s and when it started to change in the 90s is when you were president, you know, you looked at what the previous president did well and maybe built on that, and then occasionally would acknowledge the previous president did this well, and because they did it well, I want to continue doing it well. In the modern era, I don't think people work. They do build on what the previous president did. They just may or may not be okay with acknowledging it. And all right, but I think politics has just become a little less diplomatic. We'll go back to that as well. All right, let's look at the weekly question again, and then we'll talk more about the specifics of the Obama and Trump presidencies in a way that might help you with weekly questions, or not weekly questions, the multiple choice that will be available for you starting next Wednesday. All right, so hang on a sec, and we'll get back to the weekly question and talk about it just a teeny weeny bit, and then honestly we'll probably stop because it's probably okay. So when you talk about the Obama and Trump presidential campaigns, clearly you're going to talk about the use of the media, social media, network media, that sort of thing. And I think some of the things that were more traditional, I mean, both of them are innovative in their uses of media. I think Obama clearly because, well, both of them, because of who they are, what their backgrounds are. You've got, I mean, there's nothing terribly unique about somebody who's a lawyer and a congressman becoming president. However, there is something that's fairly unique about being the first African-American president, because, you know, there it is. So you definitely have to mention that. And Trump's background makes him unique. Having a rich white guy be president, that is not terribly unique. We've had 40 something of those, yeah. But the casino owner, business mogul, real estate guy who hosted the reality TV show as president, that's a whole different thing. And I would also mention maybe how they presented themselves to the media. I think with Obama, you have a very, very traditional presentation, even though his wife, same with, oh goodness, same with Bill Clinton. You have, you know, younger, attractive wife, cute kids, that sort of thing. But, you know, you also have career woman wife, which was true of Mrs. Clinton and Mrs. Obama, who are both, you know, very successful lawyers in their own right. But how they presented their families, um, I think the family presentation is pretty traditional with Obama because, you know, everyone that looks at his family goes like, he's a good husband, he's a good dad. I don't know a lot of people who look at Donald Trump and say, well, that's a nice traditional family, and he's a good husband and he's a good dad. Most of it look at Trump and go like, oh, nobody really understands what's going on there, family life. And he didn't, you know, come out and pretend that he had any sort of traditional family life at all. And that's kind of different as well. He's also he's going to include his older children as part of his presidential campaign, and that's a little different. We hadn't seen a whole lot of that in recent years. You may have seen that some with Kennedy family, maybe, but not that John Kennedy had older children. He didn't, but his siblings and the rest of his family helped run the campaign. And you saw that a little with Bush, but probably not to the extent that you saw it with Trump. And I think Trump's use of free media, you know, not paying for campaigns or campaign spots, but using lots of opportunities to be bombastic with the media and therefore get coverage to be unique. And his campaign rallies were also, I'm going to go with spectacles, and I don't necessarily mean that in a like it looked like a circus sort of way, but they became social events for people who attended them. And for people who didn't attend them, they or watched them on television, they went, well, that's really great, or man, that's an odd thing. So Trump's different, non-standard in a lot of ways. Both of them use technology very well to raise money, to advertise their beliefs, that sort of stuff, to get their faces out there, to attract voters. They don't use technology in necessarily the same way, but they both use it really well. And then I think Obama, even though clearly first African American president, good family man, nice husband, nice father, and he's going, and church attendance, he's going to play that up as well. With Donald Trump, you don't see that as well, as often. And, by playing that up, I'm not suggesting they're exaggerating it at all. I think, should we talk mainly about the background? Oh, um, how they marketed themselves is part of the campaign. That's what I'm trying to say. Apparently, I'm not saying it well. But how they present themselves publicly is part of the campaign. So I would definitely talk about that. What you probably don't want to do, no, you're good. Probably what you probably don't want to talk about the what they do in their presidencies, because that's not really the question. I mean, if you just have to say something, feel free, in addition, but remember your main focus is about their campaign. All right, I am going to stop for the day because, we're mostly done. And then this will give us some time next week to talk more specifically about the presidencies of Obama and then Trump, and then kind of rehash the weekly question if we need to, and then look at stuff to study for the quiz that should be available on Wednesday. All right, before we go, do you guys have any questions you want to ask to the whole group? And then I'll cut off the recording here in a sec. I hate to end before I get the 3-minute warning though. It's kind of sad. All right, I'm going to